This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit TemptationsTreats.com to learn more.
At LinkedIn, we know hiring is a big deal for your small business. Sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming. LinkedIn uses data that you can't find anywhere else to give you the best candidates, all so you can feel confident you're hiring the best person for the job. And even a little hiring bliss. See why 86% of small businesses who post a job on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within a day. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/achieve. LinkedIn, your next great hire is here.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth, where we're exploring all sorts of business topics. Experts from around the world join me, your host, Diane Helbig, for a conversation where they share their expertise with all of you. Take what you need when you need it. Featured on Inc.com, Forbes, and MSNBC's Your Business, this podcast is recognized as one of the best podcasts for small business, sales, leadership, social media, and more. When it comes to business, Accelerate Your Business Growth has got it covered. And now on with the show. My guest today is Gregory Shepard. Gregory has built and sold 12 businesses in biotech, transit tech, ad tech, and martech. Over his career, he has done startups, turnarounds, cleanups, and roll-ups. He is a Penguin Random House author of The Startup Life Cycle, the definitive guide to building a startup from idea to exit. He's been featured in publications like Forbes, Fortune, Entrepreneur, is a recipient of 4 PE awards for transactions between $250 million and $1 billion, and Greg has also been a TEDx and keynote speaker. Thanks so much for joining me today, Gregory.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. So, let's just, dive right into this. What is the startup life cycle?
So it goes back to a bit of research. So in the process of building all these companies, when I was done, I went to politics for a little bit, which turned out to be a nightmare. But what I was trying to do is move money from Congress down into startups, like move grants down to make more startups happen. And they didn't want to do that because of the failure rate of startups. So then I launched a Why, When, and How Founders Fail project to look at success and failure in founders. And that took 5 years. And then when I was done, I wrote the book because I was like, people need to know about this. And that's how the whole thing actually started. The book actually took me 4 years. The first book I wrote was all about founder success and failure, and frankly, it was boring and kind of depressing. So, I rewrote the whole thing and made it more about what you can expect. So the startup life cycle has 7 stages. It's the vision stage, which is where you do ideation and figure out I have an idea stage, sort of. And then you go into your product stage, which is where you build your pilot and your prototype. And then you go into go to market. This is where you do your initial launch into the market. And then standardization. This is where you document and draft best practices so you have operational efficiency when you go into the next stage, which is optimization, and then growth, and then exit. And these were all chosen because when you're building a startup, at the very beginning, you have to know 2 things: where you are and where you're going. And so it's like a GPS. And what I was trying to do is give people a GPS with turn-by-turn directions so they could forecast where they were going. And that was on the heels of the research I did, where I found that most founders didn't know anything. It was sort of like they were standing in a dark room with a flashlight, and whatever they shined the flashlight on was what they saw. In the meantime, they're stumbling around in the dark. And I wanted to sort of turn on the lights so they could see the whole room.
That is so interesting. Okay, so Why is knowing that this life cycle important?
Because as you go, you need to prepare. You can't sort of take one step without knowing what the step is after that, right? Like when you're
Yeah.
in business normally, you have a strategy. What the problem is that most people think that a strategy is brainstorming. Like we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this and all of that. That's the vision. The
Yeah.
strategy is a plan, right? Which means I'm going to do this by this date, and then I'm going to go do this by this date, and I'm going to move through the life cycle. That was one part of it. The other part of it is that a lot of the failure happens. So I'll give you the data. Is 47.1% of founders fail within the first 18 months.
Wow.
The rest of them fail for things they did in the first 18 months over the following 5 years. So the first 18 months is critical,
Yeah.
and when I looked at the data, you look at them making mistakes just because they didn't have any visibility into what they were going to be doing next. So they jumped over stages. They did the right thing at the wrong time or the wrong thing at the right time. And over time, you can see in the data that they were failing because of this. So I wanted to sort of shed light on the cycle, what you're going to be doing as a founder, what you actually do in those stages, and layer in, why, when, and how founders fail in that stage. So it gave me sort of a map to lay things out. So, when you're driving in your car and your Maps app says, hey, there's construction up ahead, there's a detour, you're going to turn here, stuff like that, right? So I wanted to give them like the ability to have turn by turn directions with warnings along the way. Hey, be careful right here because, there's a detour or there's construction on the road or whatever.
Got it. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So those of us who have been in business for a while know that there are gotchas as you go through this life cycle. Would you share with the listeners what some of those gotchas are?
Yeah, absolutely. A big one is what I call the capital trap, which is where you raise money based on a valuation, and then you have to keep raising money, raising money, raising money. You end up with very little of your company, or your company becomes overvalued, and then nobody wants to invest in it because there's no margin left, right? So a lot of founders don't realize that when you're raising money to try to build your company, your investors want a minimum of three, usually 3 to 10 times whatever they invest. So the founder thinks, oh, I raised $1 million. Now I owe this guy $1 million. And so my company has to, if it was 5 million before, now it's worth 6 million. But that's incorrect. The investor wants 3 to 10 times that back.
Mm.
So, really now your valuation, even though it might be a $6 million pre or post money valuation, it's probably going to be way, way, way more than that you'll have to sell it for. So even though your valuation is low, your investor is not going to just break even, right?
Yeah.
So it's super easy to get overvalued. This is one of the big reasons why they fail. But do you want to know the number one reason why?
Yeah.
It's because of bad decisions, and that just leaves another question. Why are they making bad decisions? So the bad decisions were based on bad advice. So then I was like, well, who's giving the bad advice?
Yeah.
And it turns out the number one suspect for giving bad advice is actually the investor. So
Oh, you're kidding.
no, it's actually really fascinating. And if you think about it, the reason why that's the case is because an investor is seeing the deal through their lens, right? So they're seeing it in terms of, how do I get my 10x? Well, you need to raise more money. You need to get sales, and you need to do it fast. How do I get a better return on investment over time, the time value of money, right? Well, you move really fast. So investors are always sort of, almost forcing these startups to move through the life cycle, and they skip over stages. So they'll usually go to market straight to growth. They'll forget standardization and optimization. And that's a huge problem because problems, founders don't realize that small problems grow when your company grows. So your problems grow with you. So then that issue of bad advice, it becomes like an iceberg. They make this little bit of bad advice and then it starts to blow up as the company gets bigger. That piece of bad advice grows and grows over time. So an example of that would be one, overvaluation, and two would be them skipping over standardization and optimization and going straight for growth and forgetting that there may be problems in their operations that will actually put them out of business later on. An example to that is typically it costs you about 33% of the first year's salary of somebody that you hire to pay for their cost all the way up to about 75% productivity. So if you're paying somebody $100,000, that's $33,000 cost sunk into getting them up to 75% productivity, which typically lasts 6 months. The reason why that is so high is because there's no standardization, there's no best practices. People disturb other people and they make lots of mistakes and people are doing things differently and it creates a lot of problems. So when you think about that, you think, oh, what if I created a onboarding plan with best practices so they don't disturb everybody and there's a simple way to do their job documented and they just go through a wiki or something online that tells them what to do. I'm not talking about, these big employee handbooks or standard operating procedures, which are all over bloated things. I'm talking about really straightforward, simple, click here, you see this, click here, do that. Apple does a really good job at this. And that deters people from having to go bother other people, which is a lot of the impact and cost associated with onboarding new people. Now, if you think about this as one of those problems that grows over time, imagine you're hiring 5 people, 10 people at a time at $33,000 a piece. And that's if you're paying somebody $100,000. If you're hiring high-end talent, you may be paying them $200,000. So now you're talking about $66,000. It's a lot of expense per employee. You're hiring 5 at a time. You can see how people can put themselves out of business by them skipping over something because the investors are like, just go right for growth because that's what they care about. Do you see what I mean?
That's, you were talking about that and I was thinking, well, sure. And why wouldn't the entrepreneur listen to them? Because if I put myself in that seat, I'm saying, okay, well, this guy wants what's best for the company because that's therefore best for them. So of course they're going to steer me in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what happens. They think, well, the investor is on the same level as I am, right? They make money if I make money, so we're the same. But investors count on the 90% failure rate, right? So they know that some of them are going to fail, and then some of them are going to succeed, and they only really need 1 or 2 to succeed to pay back all of their LPs, all of their investors, Wow. So they're already calculating that some of them are going to fail. But so for you, it's a huge deal, right? I mean, your life's in this thing. For them, you're just a number. So the other thing is that most investors, and I mean almost all of them in my survey, had never done a startup in their whole life. So they don't even know what it's like to do a startup. They have data and feedback and advice from their lens, once again, having never done a startup. So it's like somebody saying, oh, yeah, I've seen a lot of people ride a bike, but they've never ridden a bike. There's a big difference between telling somebody what to do and actually having done it yourself.
Right. Wow. That's crazy. Okay. So then what do you say to someone? Like, how do they suss out the difference, the good advice from the bad advice?
That's the trick question, right?
Yeah.
It's not that you it's not that you don't take the advice, it's that you balance it with your own instincts as a founder, right?
Ah,
Like if you're sitting there and you know the life cycle. So let's say you've read the startup life cycle and you know the next stage in the life cycle and your investors are telling you to skip it, then it's okay to have a conversation with them and tell them the ramifications of the decision that they're trying to get you to make. So a lot of the times the founders will sit there and say, "Okay," and just do it because they're the investor and they're God to this, to this founder. But really, it's okay to balance that out and say, okay, well, let me tell you the ramifications of the possible outcomes of going about it that way, right? And in some cases, honestly, I tell founders just go through the life cycle the way you're supposed to go through it, explain to them what you're doing and why you're doing it, and they will understand. I've been on so many panels where,
huh.
I'm arguing with investors, and at first they argue with me, and then after they hear the reason, the rationale for these, the standardization and the optimization steps in the life cycle, then they all of a sudden go, "Oh, okay, okay," and then they turn around and start endorsing that way of thinking. So I think it just has to do with just talking to them. It's
Yeah.
not about a matter of taking the bad advice. It's a matter of balancing their advice with your own gut instincts and what you're doing in the business. Like somebody will say, okay, hire 5 salespeople. Let's go right now. And you're like, listen, I don't have my CRM set up. I don't have pitch decks or playbooks or whatever, right? I don't have all the stuff set up for this. And you hire the
Yeah.
salespeople and then they're, scrambling, trying to put everything together. Pretty soon, all the salespeople are selling things differently at different prices. And now you're creating a
Right.
problem for service. And now you have a retention problem at the end of the day. So sometimes you just have to sit there and say, we're not ready. We have to do these things in order to be ready. And then the investor will push you on those things, but that's what you want. So sometimes it has to do with leading the horse to water.
Huh. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a very particular process.
Yeah.
And if you really want to avoid failing, then you need to follow the process because the data supports that if you don't,
Yeah.
your chances of failing are way higher, higher
Right.
than 90%, which is already high.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, most of
So
them won't even survive a couple of years.
I know it's crazy. All right. So if a
Yeah.
founder is seeking advice, where should they go?
I mean, there are mentors and consultants and board advisors, but where I tell founders is it depends on the advice you're seeking. If you're seeking advice that has to do with raising money, then you should talk to your investors. If you're seeking advice that has to do with product, then you should talk to your users, the people that are using the product, and have them help you with the way you should build your product. A lot of entrepreneurs don't realize that, the vision is just the first step. After you plot your first minimal viable product, from there, it's not your vision anymore. It's the customers. So
Hmm.
the customer guides you after that. I mean, your overarching vision is always there, but the customers drive you on the more tactical things.
Yeah,
So
that's
you talk to the
great.
customers if you want that advice.
Yeah.
If if you want advice on how to exit your business, like who you're going to sell to, talk to the potential acquirers.
Okay.
A lot of founders don't realize that most of these companies, these corporates, they have people in corporate development. They have people that are their whole job is to find deal flow to put in front of the corporate. Don't be afraid to call them. They want to hear from you. That's their job. So you call them and you ask them, how should I prepare my business if I wanted to sell to you? Right. And
Ah.
that's where you go for that advice.
Hmm.
If you're going for advice on the industry, like where you fit in the industry, then you find thought leaders in the industry and you create a relationship with them to help you understand the feeling, the culture of the industry vertical that you're in. So really depends on the advice you're seeking, depends on who what you're asking, depends on,
Right.
you know what I mean? So
I do.
That's how I answer that question.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. I think that's fabulous. It makes so much sense. Wow, this is so interesting. I mean, I love this on so many levels. Um, and I really appreciate that you kept confirming that this is what the data supports, right? Because I feel like one of the occupational hazards of an entrepreneur is that they think they're different. They think their situation is different or their success is going to be different or whatever it is. And while on some level that's true, there really is a process to go through if you want to be successful and not go through the trauma.
Yeah, there's absolutely a process. I mean, I personally believe everything has a process, but in this scenario, there's absolutely a process,
Yeah.
and the process is made out of the last 35, 40 years of people doing startups. If you look back in time, you see the failure rates have been the same for the last like 30 years, and which makes me crazy because I can't imagine any industry on the planet
Yeah.
that would allow a 90% failure rate to continue for 30 years without people standing up going, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I couldn't believe when I was doing the research how little there was and how little, how few books or platforms or whatever there was out there that supported these founders and guided them through it the way I did. Maybe it's because it takes, all in, it was 9 years, right? 5 years of research on the
Right.
book and 4 years of writing the book.
Sure.
So maybe people just didn't want to take the time. But from my perspective, I was like, this is insane. All these people, they're mortgaging their house, they're betting their life on it. If they fail, they're in a bad state, right? So,
Yeah.
you really, I felt this connection and with these people and some empathy and saying, man, somebody has to do something here. So I did the best I could by writing the book and then creating the Startup Science platform, which has all the stuff I couldn't include the book because I wrote like 5,800 pages and the book's only 250 pages. um, but yeah, so I put the rest in a platform.
Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate you. Will you tell people how they can get to the platform and get your book, please?
Yeah, you just go to Gregory Shepard, so GregoryShepard.com. And for the book, there's a link called Author, and you can get it there. You can go to Amazon or Audible or any major platform and just look up the Startup Life Cycle. And for the platform, you'll see a link that says Founders, and you click there, and it's free for you. So you can log in and take all the classes you want. There's thousands of investors, there's grants, there's templates. I mean, there's a lot in there. So knock yourself out if you're a founder, and it's my gift to you.
It's so great. Wow. It's really generous of you. And thank you for deciding that you were going to go all in and do all of the work to get this information out there. It's terrific. And thank you for spending this time with us. And listeners, thank you. You are who we're doing this for. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Discover more episodes of this podcast and explore others at evergreenpodcast.com. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And if you're looking to get your sales strategy headed in the right direction, pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.